This is Justice Worriers, a podcast where we think about things that are right and wrong in our world, and how Christian ideas can help us respond to them. We prefer hard questions over easy answers, and we'd love you to join us in our ramblings. Listen in, and contact us using the links in the show notes.
Hello and welcome to Justice Worriers episode 69. My name's Andy and as usual I'm joined by Leah. Say hi, Leah.
Hi there.
And Jörg. Say hi, Jörg.
Hello.
Hello. And we talk quite a bit on Justice Worriers about Christian ideas that have sometimes done more harm than good. And we think that we're starting a bit of a mini-series on some Christian ideas, and some of them might be in that category and some of them might be more nuanced. I think tonight is definitely quite a lot more nuanced. So tonight, we were talking before we started recording about how everything's doomed and awful, and there's quite a lot of doom and awfulness around. And we wondered how the idea of original sin might fit in to that worldview or that feeling that some of us are sometimes feeling. And generally, we wondered whether original sin might be one of those ideas that we want to throw out because it's more harm than good, does more harm than good, or might be something we want to embrace. So we thought we'd give it a go, talk about original sin. We didn't have any homework, so let's go straight into what are our worries. Does anyone have any worries they'd like to volunteer?
I worry that this is some abstract theological concept that doesn't really matter what you think about it because it doesn't really affect how we actually live our lives day to day. That's my concern.
Should we just stop recording?
Yeah, well, Jörg could just stop his entire career, maybe.
Yeah.
Jörg, what about you? Got any worries?
Well, now that Leah has got me worried about my entire career of being futile. Well, it's a really interesting one, and I'm worried that we have lost, or that we might be losing the good with the ugly. So original sin is a doctrine that is certainly not in good public credit. It's often linked to sexual sin because it has the notion that the fallenness of humanity is passed on through reproduction. It is, and therefore a lot of the sort of anti-sexual stance of the church in earlier days, hopefully, gets passed along with it, and therefore the idea of original sin seems narrow-minded, says humans are not good, and I don't know that really is the core of it. And on the flip side of this, you have the idea that humans are good to the core. And if they are, then I don't understand the world. Not sure that was enough of a worry, but yeah.
All right, so I'll tell you what my worry is. So I think my worry is much more straightforward, which is basically that I feel like I was taught Christianity as you should feel ashamed, and you should feel lucky if you get rescued from the fire, and you're bad. And not just you're bad, but it is virtuous to really understand and think about how bad you are. And in some sense, that's a big part of the practice of Christianity, to just kind of really get your head around how much shame you should feel and how bad you are. And I think that that's incredibly destructive. In fact, I have a number of friends who I see in a kind of shame, despair, sin, death spiral, whose problems with sins that they feel ashamed of are only made worse by that kind of cycle of you should feel ashamed, and also that you should lean into that, and it's good to really understand your shame. And I just want to say to those people and everyone that they're like good and beautiful, and that, you know, made by God, and not fundamentally broken or ready to be thrown away, but you know, this beautiful, good thing that is, you know, worthy of exploring. And I don't know, you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. So let me summarize. I'm proposing that there's a grand philosophical debate to be had. Andy's worried about the psychological impacts of this doctrine, and Leah is telling us it may not matter at all for how the world is running.
And maybe we should stop and make sure we've explained what it is, in case people are listening and going, what is this original sin idea?
There you go.
Go on then, Jörg. You've just read the Wikipedia
Yeah, you're
page.
No. Okay. I'm the one who can sink these things in larger metaphysical debates, you know, not the one for the simple definition points. But okay, let me try and you jump in and correct. But I mean, in its simplest form, it's the idea that humanity's fallen because of Adam's sin. That's why it's called original sin. So the idea that in Genesis 3, the story of Adam and Eve in the garden, when they rebel against what God has told them, they should only eat of the tree of life and not of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But they do this, being led to do so by the serpent. And of course, as the story goes, it's the woman who falls first, and then Adam falls. And as of that point on, God expels them from the garden and curses humanity with the sweat of the brow in the field and with the labor pains of childbirth. And then Christian theologians later pick this up and say, well, this is why we need salvation. From the beginning on, humanity was beholden by this curse of Adam and Eve, by their original sin, and that's been passed on through the regeneration of humanity, through procreation, from person to person. Nobody gets out, and therefore you need salvation, which means you need to be baptized, you need to come to Jesus, you need to participate in communion, whichever flavor of this salvation your church holds the most core, is what you then need to do to be saved. Does that summarize it? I mean, you're bad, you need God. There's nothing you can do about it. There's nothing, well, there may be good in you, but to the core, to the very core of your being, you're broken.
Do you know what Judaism, I mean, obviously that's like a super broad question, isn't it? How can you say what a whole...
Yeah.
Is there a common strand in Judaism that's at all similar, or...
Well, it changes so much over time, right? But I think the first thing that comes to mind is that much of Judaism is about the struggle of why do bad things happen to good people. So there is the core assumption that if you do the right things, God will keep you in the land, he will keep you safe. If you don't do the right things, you will be cursed. So it's not at all the same idea here.
It's quite different, isn't it? Whereas why do good people do bad things? Or bad people do good things? Yeah. Different.
Why do good people do bad things, or why is there nobody good, I guess. But the thing I would say is like this whole thing shifts, right? So at its simplest form, it's this, but in the wisdom literature, the book of Job being a good example, which is sort of a late part of the Bible. So post-exilic, really. So, you know, post the exile of Babylon, this wisdom literature arises and kind of thinks about the complicatedness of this. And Job is a good example because he's a good person, or even Satan says he's a good person, God says he's a good person, but then all these bad things happen to him, and God's answer to him is like, well, you can't know. These things are mysterious.
I think God's answer is like, well, you know, you don't understand how hard it was.
to listen to your whine? Or
no, to like make the world. Like I did a really difficult thing. Like obviously I didn't get it all right, but...
Oh, okay. That's an interesting take. Okay, maybe we need to talk about the Book of Job. But the thing that shifts it is the reckoning with the fact that this doesn't seem to work, right? So you sit in Babylon, and the teaching there is that things went terribly wrong, and you sit there because it's punishment for Israel's sin, and that's the way the history gets written. But there must be a niggling of a doubt there, because first of all, not everybody sits in Babylon. The upper classes get deported. The lower classes suddenly inherit the vineyards. And, you know, so that whole story is already a bit more complicated. But then also, there's a reckoning about, well, why is it so difficult for Israel to come out of sin? this constant cycle in the history of, through the judges, through the early kings, then the later kings, of like doing bad things, returning to God, and then doing bad things again. And the creation stories, of which I would argue Genesis 3 is part of, they don't really get formalized or completed in their narrative form and written even later until this Babylonian time. So I'm not enough of an Old Testament scholar to speak to this with any confidence, but I wonder whether the story of the fall actually also plays a role in wanting to explain why things are always turning out so badly and so poorly.
Okay, interesting.
Those who died are justified for wearing the badge. They're the chosen whites. To justify those that died, they're the chosen whites.
So I think it's interesting the way you described it, Jörg, because I think I agree with I think that's also my intellectual understanding of original sin. And it sounded when you were describing it like essentially we're saying everyone is born into this curse from God, basically, or you might want to put it in a more politic way, but like we're born into a difficult situation, right? And my kind of experience of that idea has been almost the opposite, which is everything is my fault, right? Which is kind of
Yeah, and that's interesting on a number of levels. Like the sort of big debate around this, where the doctrine of original sin arises, is between Augustine and a guy called Pelagius. Pelagius, so this is 4th century, right? So Latin theology, early church, figuring out these things. And Pelagius believes that you can be good out of your own will because God created your soul and therefore you're good. You can be good. Now, salvation may enable you to be better at it, but good people can live good lives. And what you're saying, Andy, reminds me a little bit more of that than original sin, because why would you feel shame when it's not your fault?
Yeah, I think I'd get on better with him if we went down the pub.
Yeah, but I mean, if you think about like in your biological constitution, in your social constitution, whatever, we're not built to withstand sin because it's written into the very condition of our being. I don't understand where we then end up with this individualized notion, you're bad, come to Jesus, you dirty, dirty sinner, when I would think actually the sort of philosophical depth of original sin is not that at all. It's a fundamental brokenness. And Augustine even says this, as I just realized, sort of kind of scrolling through some reminder literature, basically. It's not that original sin gets passed along because the sexual act is somehow low or lustful. It is because in procreating, we pass along a fundamental brokenness of humanity. And I don't know, that rings true. It's not the only thing we pass along, but like, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, describing us as living under a curse that we can never escape from doesn't sound that far from, like, so long as you allow for the idea that we're also living under a blessing and light breaks through unexpectedly as well.
It's funny because my experience growing up was in a church that believed that sinless perfection was possible. So, although they would very much believe in original sin, there was an idea that once you were born again, you were so totally removed from that realm that you could live a sinless life. Which then created a whole load of shame if you were, trying to do the right thing, because, well, if you weren't managing to do that, then it was clearly your fault. So then you end up in all that sort of passage, is it Romans, where Paul, like, saying the good that I want to do, I can't do. And so you end up kind of in that, oh my goodness, my life is just a series of trying to muster up the willpower to keep walking in this realm of the spirit that I'm meant to be walking in order to
Become better
live
than
this
Paul.
good life and be better than Paul, of course. And so then that kind of plays into a whole sort of, self-help gospel that it's all about. Yeah. Although everyone seemed to spend all their time saying it wasn't about your willpower, you just had to let God. But then it was actually, it's actually about whether you manage to let God or not. So that is actually comes back
whether
to
you've done good enough at
again.
letting God.
Yeah. So all of it kind of became just incredibly hard.
Yeah, and did you also have did you ever feel like questioned whether you're really saved if you didn't live up to
Oh
that?
yeah, absolutely. Well, you hadn't really been born again, you see, because people.
Yeah.
Lots of churches didn't believe in this born again thing that we were kind of party to. And anyway, maybe I'm getting off the point a little bit, but so this notion of original sin kind of underpinned that whole idea that we are all flawed. And it was all just so personal, if you were anything of like my kind of personality, it just burrowed you into your own head about would I manage to, summon up the willpower to be the better person that I needed to be in order to let go and let God let me be good enough. Because I was fighting this nature that was still part of me that was a sinner.
But yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? That it didn't give you the freedom of thinking, well, yes, of course I failed because I'm under this curse, or I inherit this brokenness. It was just like, yes, I'm really terrible, essentially.
Yeah.
And I could not be, I could be not terrible. So the mistake here is the soteriology, the doctrine of salvation that you were taught, not the doctrine of original sin.
Not the original sin. Well, the salvation came in allegedly being born again, but it actually really seemed to come down to whether you could manage to kind of walk in it or be part of it or whatever.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So, yeah. But you're right. And so I think I then found some kind of freedom in moving away from that idea that we were all flawed and broken. Well, no, did I? No, I'll shut up. I need to think a bit more.
I do think that your question about is this relevant to our lives? I feel like we're answering that, right? Like these ideas. If this is what we're talking about when we talk about original sin, whether it's a correct or a wrong idea of original sin, I think this has a massive impact on people's lives. Like that sense of whether, for example, whether being good is possible, whether we are cursed, whether we're blessed, and also whether every failure is like evidence that we're not loved, for example.
Yeah. And this begins with the way we read the story of the fall, right? So if the story of the fall is somehow secondary to the act of creation, then you're assuming that there is an alternative storyline in which humanity wasn't led by the same set of idiots who then fall. And therefore, that's always you. Because you now live in the story of Adam, you're going to fall, but it could always be different. And I don't think that that's what is meant by these stories, but actually that we are to read Genesis 1 to 3 as the entire creation account, as one big package that says, this is what the world is like. There's something rotten at the core of it. There's possibly even a necessity of this to happen this way, or this is how it happened. There's no alternative storyline here. We don't live in paradise. And in the very hearts of who we are, we rebel against God. We rebel against the things that we do. We earn our bread in pain. We reproduce in pain. And just that's how the world is. So it's an etiology that's trying to explain what we're seeing today. It's not an origin story that says, let me tell you how things were before the fall, and then this weird other thing happened. But actually, the whole package is explaining what the world is like. Does that make sense?
How does it fit with the idea that there's some future destination, heaven, where it is like paradise?
Right.
Because we're supposed to be already living in that or something,
No, I don't think we are. We're supposed to see glimpses of it.
Yeah.
but we're not meant to be living in it because it's not of the same. It's not part of the same storyline. It's almost like that pre-fall paradise. It's speculative. It's not part of who we are right now.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
This is why the new creation is such an abrupt, like the old has passed away.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is why I'm really skeptical of people who will, like, of this kind of soteriology that says, with the right prayer, you can somehow transcend the original sin of Adam. That's not even what Augustine wanted. Augustine wanted to emphasize the need of humans for the grace of God, no matter what, no matter how good you're trying to be.
There's something quite interesting about that as well, because it makes some very specific claims about Christianity that kind of take you down the line. I know we're talking more about salvation than original sin maybe, but take you down the line that the only people in the world who are capable of resisting the pull of this original sin are those people who have entered into a relationship with Christ.
Right.
So
yeah,
that is a very, very black and white way to see the world. And,
yes.
And that doesn't then leave scope for you to have very much hope for an awful lot of the rest of humanity. It's quite bleak.
And it also, like, there just would be more evidence for it if it was true, right? Like the evidence that I see is that Christians, like everyone else,
just as rubbish,
are mired in this world which has good and bad things in it, and they do good and bad things.
My atheist grandmother used to say to me whenever I wanted to talk to her about Jesus, like, I get where you're coming from, Jörg, but I mean, it's been here for 2,000 years, and has the world gotten better? Like, is this what you're seeing?
Well, that's where the devil comes in, because he's trying to attack all those good Christians all the time and make them fall and make them kind of, Yeah, anyway, shut up.
But it's not to say that, like, I have seen being a Christian have a good effect on people's lives, maybe even on my own, but like
in the round,
patently,
in the round,
we Christians are not like on a different level, like operating in a different way. I listened to, I wish I could remember the name of the person, but I listened ages ago to a Nomad podcast where there was a philosopher on it, and I think he was actually talking about original sin, and he was talking about the, like, people talk about like the aching hole inside you, and then Jesus comes and fills it, and he was like, but then you've still got the aching hole after that. What's up with that? And he was saying, actually, like, he was understanding that that aching hole to be like humanity, and or like, the human condition or whatever. Yeah, and the idea that Christians don't have that ache, I don't agree with it. I have it anyway. Well,
that's why you're not fully born again, right? That's where that judgment thing comes in that tradition.
Yeah.
And I mean, the devil is a whole interesting sideshow here, because it kind of takes us to the core of the problem, which is, do people have free will to act as they do, right? If that's the case, then they're just listening to the wrong voice. But then it's even interesting what role the devil plays in there. Like, if you have free will, then how come the devil kind of has this kind of influence over people? But this is kind of the core of the issue of the debate between Augustine and Pelagius even. Like, Pelagius believed in this notion of free will. Augustine originally did, but he revised his idea and then saw the grace of God a lot more important. And this is, of course, where the Reformation then docks onto Augustine as well. Now, I find the idea of free will so interesting, so fascinating, because I don't know what that is. The more I think about subjectivity, the more I think about how we grow up, the more we know about our biology and about causality, about how hormones affect our brains and all of that, then all of a sudden I'm actually in a subject theory that's much more tied in with the way the world is, where agency is a channeling of forces that act upon us, and maybe a recombining of them, but not this kind of disembodied soul that somehow lives inside us and is free to decide whatever it wants to do at every given moment.
And I think that's the voice that I was talking about before in my head, this entirely, it was all down to me, in my head, and not acknowledging any influence of the world around, or, how much I'd had to eat that day, or, what I'd eaten that day, or how, all those things that we all know affect our mood and our abilities and our decision making.
Yeah. Not to mention, like, the specific inheritance from our parents or our upbringing that we bring, like
our countries, our culture, everything.
Yeah.
And even, I mean, this is how I talk to my students about this, is like, whenever they bring up like free will and supervision, like, are you here by free will? Is this what you wanted to do this afternoon? Interesting. There's institutional pressures. Where do they come from? Your own expectation, but that's perhaps internalized your parents. You know how you're supposed to behave in here. You can't just leave and get up. So on this idea of free will, you say, I want to be here. But actually, when we analyze, you realize all these institutional pressures that you're just combining in your very act of being here. And me too, by the way, like playing off of you in this way. So this wholly modern idea of this sort of free will that is lord, one should probably say, of its own fate and own cognition and own thinking any given time of day. I think that's where the mistake begins. And we are bound to lose this. We're bound to fall for this if we lose the idea of original sin, I almost want to say, because we lack the insight that we're so embedded in what we found when we were thrust into this world and when we became conscious in the first place. The very language we did that in, the very kind of fights that we put up as a terrible 2-year-old with our parents, and which ones they let pass and what not. I mean, all of that was forming the way we engage with the world, the way our will works. So it was never disembedded to begin with.
Do you know, I think I had just you mentioning toddlers, I had one of those like absolute clarity of kind of the human condition moments when I was taking one of my children for a walk, probably about that kind of 2 or 3-year-old age. And we were by the Thames, and this swan just suddenly like rose up kind of and flapped its wings, kind of this enormous, very gracious kind of beating of its wings. And my son just went, "Make it do it again, mummy, 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 make it do it again. I want it to do it again." And somehow it just like, super sleep deprived or something, and in this weird, like, fairly disembodied plane, I was like, oh my goodness, that's the human condition in a nutshell. I can't control that thing. He can't control that thing. He desperately wants it to happen again, but it ain't going to happen again. And it's the irony is that what we were just describing, that whole kind of super individualized way of thinking, is actually probably quite a good definition of what original sin actually is. That whole way of looking at the world that is all focused around me, which is presumably how a 2-year-old's brain is working. It's figured out that it's separate from its mother now, as far as I gather, and therefore it seems to think that everything centers around it, which is, I think, why they kind of think you have all these terrible tantrums. Right.
So you're saying it's part of our inheritance that we're very self-centered, but I was thinking that it's also kind of the religion of our society at the moment, right? The idea that we make decisions about ourselves and we're masters of our own destiny. And like the heroes are the people who come out on top of this system because they really are, they have enough agency essentially to push themselves to the top.
And to link both of those things together, I mean, this is total speculation, but this is always why I find the idea of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil being the problem, that you make yourself like God, as if you could divorce yourself from the world and be judge of what's right and what's wrong.
Right.
Which is a way of centering everything around your perception of it, like, make this one do that again. The world is sort of, I'm the one who can orchestrate this whole thing. I have no idea if this is actually backed up by any sort of biblical studies literature on this, so do your own Googling, but that's always been a thought in my mind with regard to this. And again, it's not, the recognition of that is not the same as saying you're evil, because that would mean that it could be otherwise. And that again is this kind of judging of good and evil that keeps perpetuating, right? So this is why I'm actually like, I used to hate the doctrine of original sin and the idea that we don't have free will or something like that. But I don't know. I've grown to like it because it does take away some of the hubris of the free agent in the world whether it's the born-again Christian or the liberal do-gooder who's going to change the world through this one well-placed demonstration. It just doesn't seem to be the way it works, and I'd rather be a more realistic observer of the human condition.
So that's all very lovely. If we're saying it's kind of by and large out of our control and we have very little agency, then why on earth does God have any kind of wrath against human beings or judgment against human beings for behaving like this? Because what do you know? It's where we're born.
I think this could be the flip side of the creation story. Again, if we think of it as a package, then it says something is fundamentally broken in us, but we remember a time somewhere deep within us where this wasn't so. That it may, like we somehow as humans, we have the capacity to imagine a world where this doesn't exist. So again, like as this package, right? So why are humans capable of writing a story like this that contains both a fundamental claim to everything being broken, but also saying, but it wasn't always this way. It didn't have to be this way. So rebelling against it at the same time.
Yeah, and even the word broken, like, why do we say it's broken as opposed to saying it's just like this?
It's just like it is, yeah. And if that's the case, then maybe God's wrath is reflective of that, right? The human sense of God's wrath is that imagined memory of it not having been this way, of it might have gone another way. We can, I mean, the weird thing about free will is that at any moment, and the very way we speak and engage with one another right here, is that we can always imagine that we could have said something different. A slightly different word. We might not have said this. Like we live in this kind of sense of constant alternative possibilities that by the law of causality we would intake, you know, and which may have all been influenced by previous, I don't know, hormones, previous choices, whatever. You know, if you just spell out the law of causality, there's only one path you can go. But we can always imagine thousands of different paths, and from those we think about how we could have behaved better. And that's, of course, where the notion of judgment comes from. So we have an imagination of a different world, which, too, is a beautiful thing about human createdness. I don't know, that's my pocket philosophy on free will.
So it sounds like the answer is, like, God's wrath is actually our imagining of...
Well, of course, yeah.
Because we know that things could be different.
I mean, who has seen God, right? And sometimes he loves us, sometimes he hates us. And I mean, these are this like humans wrestling with the idea of God, with the experience of God, but never ever grasping them.
And do you think we have this sense of wanting something to be consumed? That we feel that there's part of us, either part of our actions or part of our history, our past, that we actually kind of almost welcome the idea of some sort of purifying fire that might take away the bad stuff.
Maybe that's the second step, but in the first instance, because we can do these hypothetical experiments, hypothetical sort of thoughts about how I could have done things differently, because we have the language, the culture to reflect on what would be better, and because we have this very penchant of judging all the time, we feel judged ourselves. I don't know that sort of, you know, we used this example earlier, wolf in a sheep pen, right? I don't know that a wolf goes away and says, that was crap. I should have just taken the sheep I needed. I mean, who knows what a wolf thinks, but like, there's not a lot of indication that they go there with hanging shoulders and sit and reflect why that instinct got the better of them. As humans, somehow we have a capacity to not do that. And the interesting thing here is that maybe it's the very ability that we said, this ability to judge between good and evil, that is, you know, the very core of a fallenness, is also the thing that produces within us the looking for a better alternative that we didn't take, which then leads to us judging ourselves or judging one another. And in that process, also projecting that judgment out to God.
Yeah. So they're kind of setting ourselves up as gods of the tree of knowledge is, if we see that as part of our birth story, our creation story.
Yeah.
Then it becomes like, Not like we fell off the cliff because we tried to be God, but we just kind of grew up into something that's a tiny bit like God, and that caused all our problems.
Well, we find ourselves in this ability, like whatever, if you want to take the evolutionary history of it, like we're a species that's able to do this. And maybe there's a gradual thing, maybe a dolphin is closer to this than, an earthworm. But that's where we find ourselves. And that's both a curse and something beautiful, because we constantly imagine a good, a better that we didn't do. And I think this is all embedded in this ancient story already. Like, at least that's how I would read it.
And now you do what they tell you. And now you do what they told you.
Yeah, no, it keeps coming back to me, this idea that we're under a blessing and we're under a curse.
Almost like Paul saying, "Oh, wretched me," in the passage you cited there.
And the problem with the theology of my childhood was this idea that somehow there was an escape from it this side of the grave, right? From that warring, from that conflict, that longing to do better and not doing it. And actually, Paul was being real about the ongoing human condition.
And here's the other thing, falling into God's grace. So not cheap grace, right? Not like, oh, whatever. And I mean, your question, I think, points to this, like why then not just be indifferent? I mean, that also kind of forgets that part of our created condition, that we somehow do have this ability to differentiate between good and evil. But the answer, I think, in Jesus' death and resurrection is a letting go. And I think this is also the story of Christian salvation, a trusting in God's grace that says, I am hopeful that just as Jesus had to surrender his spirit into God's hands, this is what I'm doing now. I'm hoping for that same grace that raised him from the dead, even though he had taken on the pinnacle of human destructiveness. And it's in that hope that I place my own belief, my own trust, my own salvation, not in becoming better as such, but in knowing that if there's any way out of this spiral, at the end of days, it's God's grace. And in very little ways today, maybe it's also God's grace, because I can stop judging myself for all the things I haven't done and can live out of that coming. Yes, that's who you are. Yes, you're incomplete. And yes, there's good in you, but that good is never pure. It never was pure ever since Genesis 3. Like, if that's the creation story, it's always the two things mixed together.
Yeah, and we're never going to step away from failure. Yeah, I just think that's a really dangerous idea to put in someone's head, that like, if you were just doing this following Jesus thing right, you wouldn't be dealing with sin anymore. Like, and I want to put it that way because that includes other people's sin, right? So even if this idea that you could somehow dispense with your own sin, you'll still be dealing with everyone else's sin. And the idea that that's not just as much a part of you as your own sin is also a foolish idea, I think.
Anyway, holiness traditions, I mean, they went quite far on that. I mean, denying the flesh, like the more extreme versions of the, sex only for procreation, because that's where sin lives, and this kind of food. They were pacifists. I mean, they were, like, in some ways, they were really, really great because they didn't want to be part of these systems. But then in other ways, this idea that with the right technique, you could get out from your sinful nature just leads to hypocrisy, condemnation,
and pretending.
A lot of pretending, yeah.
Yeah, and I see it all over the place in Christianity, this idea that if we could just somehow hit the right formula, if you could read the right book, go to the right conference, have the right quiet time, say the right prayer, be with the right group of people, then you'd crack it, and I think it plays beautifully into our culture of selling books and selling resources and, selling events.
And self-improvement, right?
Yeah, and it very much mirrors the world's self-improvement industry, which is also kind of selling a very similar thing, albeit without any divine help.
I mean, I think your question, Leah, that still resonates with me is like, well, why then not be fatalistic about it? And I think this is what is so really, really tricky here. Because there is a version, and Orthodox Lutherans kind of did that, right? You could go to church drunk. It doesn't really matter. You don't have to go to church at all. It's all grace. And so no matter what you do, right? Or in a sort of more modern, slightly darker version of it, it's like, oh, well, we'll never be great. So what does it matter? We'll just wait, I don't know, for death. Or we just enjoy your little family, be good to your neighbor, and don't bother with anything else because it'll never be better. So I think that's still a problem for me. I don't have a solution for it.
We're going to see more and more, well, I'm just not going to engage with the real world, right? So none of this stuff matters. I can't do anything about it. So I'm just going to game. I'm going to do all these things that take place in a virtual world that means I don't have to engage with this one. I think that is the new outworking of that.
Yeah, I agree. And this is where it's hard to understand, and maybe this is why it's difficult to pry apart the story of creation from the story of the fall, and why it's healthy to read it as a package, because then we see the double-sided nature of this. We find within us the desire to do good, and we find within us the recognition that every time we try and do that, we fail in one way or another, because we are such complicated creatures. We're embedded into so many forces and powers that we don't just act out our own idealistic will, and yet we cannot stop wishing we could. Yet we cannot stop wishing for that moment of paradise when this wasn't an issue. And it's both of these are alive in us. And I think my simple answer would be the fatalistic side denies this spark of wishing different. And this is why it's important to keep both creation stories together.
Yeah, basically it won't make you happy. Because that thing is still a part of you, even if you decide to deny it. That desire for goodness is still there. Yeah,
but it's the same mistake of tearing apart both creation stories, because you say, well, with the fall, we lost the original goodness. And if I have any problem with original sin doctrine, it's that, right? That with Adam's choice to eat that apple, all of that spark, this desire for paradise was gone. I don't believe that's true. But if we read those two stories together, then they proclaim very clearly that we find both of those sides within us, the imagination of a better world and the realization that fundamentally it just doesn't seem to be coming, or we don't seem to be capable of bringing it about.
Does any of this answer the question of what we do, how we respond to these ideas?
We keep going. We keep going in all the messy unpredictability, impossible to differentiate fully good from fully wrong, not sure if what we do will make an impact. Maybe it'll make things worse, maybe it'll make things better, but we don't give up. We look for other stories of resistance and we create our own stories of resistance, and we don't ever think that some magic that we can do is going to fix everything or even feel that significant, but we just keep doing it and we keep showing up.
And I think for me, the word love rings loud here too. Loving self and loving others, because it begins with acceptance, right? That the imperfect we see doesn't cancel out the good. Neither is the good so strong that it's never going to be imperfect. And if I can accept that, and maybe that is also the way the grace of God comes in so important, that He loved us first so we can love others, right? So receiving this love, this recognition that this is who you are, I know this is who you are, and yet I love you, and yet my promises stand by you, and yet, you may kill my very own son and I will raise him to the dead. Is that your evil won't be the last thing. So that's the story of salvation to me. And once I've really imbibed that, I can extend that toward others and see both sides all the time.
Yeah, that's very much what came to mind for me. Like, what story do we tell others about themselves? That story includes mistakes and it includes the most amazing moments. And if we can try and provide or learn the kind of acceptance that I feel God is offering us through failures and through beauty to each other, then we can kind of learn the truth of that. So in practice, that means like not expecting people to be perfect, but also expecting people to really surprise us with their goodness as well as their mistakes.
And the expectations we place on ourselves as well, not expecting ourselves to be perfect, and giving ourselves grace when we mess things up, and having the humility to pick ourselves up and not give up and dust ourselves off and try again.
And maybe talking very differently about sin and salvation when we're in church, when we're talking to one another, not this very black and white way that says you either one or the other, but that says, hey, you recognize both in you. Like, yes, there's this fundamental brokenness. It's there, but here's also that spark. And this combination is where we live. And this is what God has said yes to and will maybe one day lead us out of, but not in this era, not in this world.
Yeah, and I think that also plays into that idea of looking forward to something that we call the kingdom of God or whatever, but that idea that it's kind of here as well because we are trying to live in the mindset of that kingdom. I was thinking about those verses in Hebrews where they talk about all those incredibly flawed heroes, so Abraham and Isaac and all the rest of it, and that they were looking for something different. Now, you could just read that as, they were looking for pie in the sky when they died, but I don't think you have to read it that way.
Yeah.
They were looking for a different world and in their best moments, able to actually be part of it, but frequently not.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's holding that good side of humanity alive, right? I mean, that's what faith is. And I think, as you were saying in the intro, talking about the dark times, we had this conversation too, where it feels like every podcast, everything you hear, it's just like, it's doom and gloom. And yes, it is difficult. It's probably not as difficult here as in many, many other countries in the world. But where's faith? Where's our faith here? That says, no, there's still that spark of goodness. I'm still going to look for that stories. There's still, in all that darkness, there's something else going on. There's another thread. There's another storyline coming through.
Yeah, and I think being aware of those things those places where things are much worse than they are here, it would be so great to hear more of the stories of hope there, because I'm certain that if you scratch the surface in Ethiopia, in Gaza, as much as there's horror and brutality and awful things going on, I bet you wouldn't have to go far to find stories of enormous courage and bravery and self-sacrifice. And if we're not careful, we play into this idea from our side of the things not being that terrible, that, oh my goodness, well, when it all falls apart here, then it's going to be every person for themselves, because that's how it is over there where stuff is already dreadful.
And again, to keep the flip side of that alive, and none of these stories cancel out the evil, the brutality, the horror that you see there, but neither is the complete story. Again, it's both. It's that longing for paradise, it's that beauty, that glimpse of amazing nature, of amazing life, and then that being destroyed. Like, it's always both. And judging between good and evil wants to make it one or the other, and I think that's the problem, maybe.
Yeah, I think that the sense of like doom and of how everything's falling apart and people are behaving worse and worse that story is a story of like them and us. And I feel like if we can learn anything from original sin, it's to expect and accept our own flawed selves and other people's flawed selves without dismissing them as people or as the enemy. So I keep coming back to, and I don't know how to apply it, but in terms of what do we do in our lives? Part of it has surely got to be to resist this division of the world into the good people and the bad people, and oh no, the bad people are taking over, and finding another way of talking to and talking about other people.
Yeah.
Maybe it is more about talking about forces, ideas. What is the goodness that we're looking for? What do we want from a society that works? What is the evil that is holding us back? Rather than pinning this onto individuals. I mean, they carry this out and they're part of it, and I wouldn't want to argue against responsibility before the law or whatever, but wherever you have an unhealthy system, you need to cut it where it rubs the most, where it hurts the most, right? So that's where responsibility comes in for me. I don't need the individual to be held accountable for that to take place still and say, here's something really unhealthy going on that needs to be stopped. So this is not to lose any sense of judgment, to lose any notion of responsibility as such. Well, maybe responsibility, but badness. Sorry.
Yeah, we don't want to, surely the doctrine of original sin shouldn't lead us to deny the existence of sin.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
But we should also understand and accept our own responsibility in many of the systems and ways that our society works. Not necessarily our own agency, but our own participation and benefit from complicity. Yeah. All right. Well, there's some actions for you, listener. All right, so I'm gonna read a poem that we found that we just while we were discussing the show before, while we were preparing. So this comes with a health warning that, like, I don't know anything about the author of this poem except that he was apparently an early environmentalist and objected to the US getting involved in the Second World War, so it's a controversial person. But yeah, so no guarantees about the character of the poet, but we thought the poem was quite interesting and on topic. So I'll read it now. It's called Original Sin. It's by Robinson Jeffers. The man-brained and man-handed ground ape, physically the most repulsive of all hot-blooded animals up to that time of the world. They had a dug pitfall and caught a mammoth. But how could their sticks and stones reach the life in that hide? They danced around the pit shrieking with ape excitement, flinging sharp flints in vain, and the stench of their bodies stained the white air of dawn. But presently one of them remembered the yellow dancer, wood-eating fire, that guards the cave mouth. He ran and fetched him, and others gathered sticks at the wood's edge. They made a blaze and pushed it into the pit, and they fed it high around the mired sides of their huge prey. They watched the long hairy trunk waver over the stifled trumpeting pain, and they were happy. Meanwhile, the intense colour and nobility of sunrise, rose and gold and amber, flowed up the sky. Wet rocks were shining, a little wind stirred the leaves of the forest and the marsh flag flowers. The soft valley between the low hills became as beautiful as the sky, while in its midst, hour after hour, the happy hunters roasted their living meat slowly to death. These are the people. This is the human dawn. As for me, I would rather be a worm in a wild apple than a son of man. But we are what we are, and we might remember not to hate any person, for all are vicious, and not be astonished at any evil, all are deserved, and not fear death. It is the only way to be cleansed.
Oh, this is radical.
What do you think of that?
It's interesting that he has it within him to think about not being human, right?
Mm-hmm.
He draws on all of human culture on the very historical end of his time of hunting the mammoth to then say, that's not right.
There's very little hope there.
The hope's in death.
Yeah, don't like that much.
Death is how we're cleansed.
Yeah. At the risk of arguing against death here, I would need a resurrection too, a hope of that this isn't the end story, because if being cleansed through death, then it's the annihilation of humanity that he's arguing for, and that is also then the not be astonished at any evil, all are deserved. That's quite some harsh stuff. I love the poem. Like it hits a lot of very, very interesting notes.
Yeah.
But yeah, maybe this is why we do need the horizon of redemption, because otherwise you're in this kind of, yeah, the world is what it is, and the only way out is to embrace death as your form of punishment for your complicity in the evil of this world. Like, whoa.
Which is kind of that eco-radicalism kind of angle that is about a little bit, isn't it? Kind of, well, the planet's going to be okay. Humanity's not going to fare well, but,
we get what we deserved.
Gaia will be okay. We'll get what we deserved.
But again, there's this guy able to imagine a different world, if only as a contrast foil, appreciating the beauty of the sunrise as somehow in contrast with people eating the mammoth.
Yeah, not appreciating the beauty of the people.
Yeah, or even seeing the contrast here as something that needs to be reconciled rather than erased.
Yeah, so is this where we end up if we have a proper doctrine of original sin that misses out original goodness and original blessing?
Well, also doctrine of original sin that says I can judge everything, and from the vantage point of being embedded in the very game I'm judging, I'm the judge of it. And game's not the right word.
Which you have to eat from the apple before you can do that.
Yeah. I'll be a worm in a wild apple than the son of man. I'd rather be devoured. Oh, this is full. I need to read more of this guy's stuff. I love the language. I love what he's doing. There's a lot of thought in here. But I'm with Leah on the end. It's just like, okay, yikes.
Yeah, well, I think maybe this helps. This is a foil, right? And it helps us understand what we believe or what we're trying to be in the world, especially in the face of, like, what we might call despair or just judgment.
Yeah.
I think church urgently needs to figure out something to say to the despair.
Yeah.
That isn't just personal salvation.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because personal salvation doesn't help this poem. It's not.
No, that's interesting.
Does not cut it, does it?
No. As for me, I'd rather be with Jesus, and yeah, that doesn't.
Yeah, I'd rather not. Yeah, I
don't think personal salvation as an idea helps me. Like, I would dearly love there to be personal salvation and for me to get it. But yeah, it doesn't feel like what's going on in the world.
So where we talk so much about hope, but we don't clearly elucidate what that actually is about.
Yeah. So maybe there is a follow-up to be had here, isn't there? What now? Like, how do you live in that love that can appreciate the sunrise and the killing of the mammoth and not somehow try to divide those apart? Because that's not going to happen. Like, we're not going to get to that world where one exists without the other. Not in this era.
Yeah. Yeah. Is our hope really just that there is goodness, and that includes there is goodness in people?
Well, I mean, you have brought in death. I mean, I would go as far as to defend progress here and say maybe there is a development into other forms of living that are perhaps more considerate. But if anything, I can only see this in a very, very large scale, possibly across multiple planets and civilizations as the universe unfolds. But in a very painful process, there's still a lot of good happening. And I find that oddly comforting.
Yeah.
But I can't see the sort of very short arc of justice that we sometimes imagine.
You mean like the Millennium Goals?
Or the very sort of quick progress, yeah. And I mean, if like this sort of post-Second World War optimism that now that the right international institutions are in place, things won't happen like this. I mean, there's so much forgetfulness in there, so much ignorance of what goes on even in that sort of supposedly happy post-war world.
Sounds like Star Trek, Jörg.
Yes.
Millennia to come.
Yeah, but I think Star Trek's embedded in that whole optimism of if we just put the right rules in place and just learn to be decent to each other, we're on the verge of sorting it out. All right, well, I don't feel like we came to a great conclusion there, listener, but hopefully there's something to chew on. So thanks a lot, Leah and Jörg, and we'll see you next time.
You've been listening to Justice Warriors. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and you can also follow us on social media by searching for Justice Warriors, where warrior is spelt like someone who worries about things. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave us a rating, since that helps other people find us. Also, please tell your friends about us in real life. We'd love to hear from you. To get in touch, use the email address in the show notes or contact us via the social media links. Thanks for listening.
They told you. Now you do what they told ya. Now you're under control. You're killing